Hello and welcome to the History of True Crime. Today we will be looking into the story of Fred and Rose West. Rosemary West, born November 29, 1953, grew up in a troubled home where she was regularly physically and sexually abused by her father, William, who suffered from paranoid schizophrenia. Rose's mother, Daisy, suffered from depression and received electroconvulsive therapy whilst pregnant with Rose. Rose struggled in school, frequently daydreaming, and was recognized as a moody teen. As she developed, it was noted that Rose became increasingly obsessed with her body, frequently parading nude around her house in front of her younger brother Graham. At the age of 13, Rose began to molest Graham and their youngest brother Gordon. Fred West, born September 29, 1941, grew up in Hertfordshire. He was the first surviving child and became the eldest of 6 to parents Walter and Daisy. The Wests were a poor family of farm workers that worked hard to earn a living, all 6 of the children completing seasonal work to earn a wage for their family. Fred was described by his classmates as having an aptitude for woodwork and art, but was scruffy, lazy, and regularly in trouble. Fred left school at the age of 15 in 1956 and began work at Moorcourt Farm. A seemingly normal childhood until Fred later revealed that he had been introduced to sex and engaged in bestiality at the age of 12. His belief that incest was normal supposedly stemmed from the acts that his father would perform with Fred's sisters. These claims were dismissed as fantasy by Doug, Fred's youngest brother. During his teenage years, Fred was noted as somewhat of a sexual predator, aggressively pestering young women and pressuring them into engaging in intercourse with him, where he would use those women for his own gratification, nothing more. Fred sustained several injuries over the course of his late teens due to a motorbike accident and being pushed down some stairs after attempting to grope another young girl, which caused Fred to have fits throughout his life. In June 1961, Fred was arrested for raping his 13-year-old sister, Kitty, and impregnating her. On questioning, he simply asked, "Doesn't everyone do it?" He openly admitted to molesting young girls since his early teens. The case was dropped when his sister refused to testify against Fred in court. He was banished from the family home and moved to the Much McLean house, belonging to his Aunt Violet. In 1962, Fred became reacquainted with Renee Costello at the age of 21, having met previously and dated for several months prior before she returned to Scotland. They married on November 17th of the same year. Renee was pregnant with the child of an Asian bus driver at the time of her marriage to Fred, and it is believed that she relocated to England from Glasgow due to her family's displeasure with the approaching birth of a mixed-race baby. Their daughter was born in March 1963 and named Charmaine. Growing up, the two told Charmaine that she was adopted as a way of explaining her mixed ancestry. Shortly after the birth of Charmaine, Renee and Fred relocated again to Glasgow. 1 year later, in July, Renee bore a daughter, Anna Marie West. November 4, 1965. Fred accidentally ran over a young boy whilst in his ice cream truck. The boy died immediately. Fred was cleared of any wrongdoing, but due to mistrust toward him from the community, the family relocated once again, renting a caravan in Gloucester. With 2 children, the couple hired a nanny, Issa McNeil, who, along with her friend, 16-year-old Anne McFall, spent a lot of time at the West's property. The relationship between Fred and Renee became volatile, both of them having affairs, Fred fathering an illegitimate child and treating his own children harshly. It was later discovered that Fred was beating Renee and pushing her to turn to prostitution to supplement their income. She called John McLachlan, a man she was having an affair with, for aid. Charmaine and Anna Marie stayed with Fred, and Renee traveled to England regularly to visit her daughters. Renee and Fred remained married, and she soon went between living with Fred and returning home to Glasgow on occasion. When Renee left, McFall fell pregnant and demanded that Fred leave his wife and marry her. Fred's answer to this was to murder her, binding her wrists together, killing and dismembering the young girl before cutting the fetus from her body and discarding it. Meeting Rose in 1968. She was only 15 years old at the time. She initially turned him down. The two met while waiting for a bus. He continued to pursue her, and the two soon grew closer after Fred's advances were accepted by the young Rose. Around the same time, Fred had been linked to the disappearance of Mary Bastholme. Evidence acquired was only circumstantial, and Fred was not imprisoned. Rose's parents were disgusted by the relationship after Fred had been invited to her home. They forbade her to see Fred and eventually was sent to a children's home where she was only allowed to leave under set circumstances. With each visit to her parents, Rose made every effort to see Fred. When Rose left the children's home, she went to live with Fred and became a nanny to Fred's 2 children, Charmaine and Anna. Rose became pregnant and gave birth to their daughter Heather in 1970. While West was in prison at the time for petty theft, Rose cared for their young daughter and both of Fred's children. It is reported that Rose became violent and is believed to have murdered Charmaine, aged 8, in 1971. Charmaine was not reported missing until Renee came looking for her daughter. She was found strangled and dismembered in the same general area as McFall. Initially, her body was kept in the coal store of the cellar, and when the body was found, several of her bones were missing. It is believed that they had been retained as keepsakes. On Fred and Rena's separation, she maintained sporadic contact with her children. In 1971, after Fred was released from prison, it is said that she visited the property to see her children. This is the last time she was seen alive. Her body was later found dismembered and placed in bags alongside a metal tube. It is believed that she was strangled by Fred and then sexually assaulted before being extensively dismembered and buried by a cluster of trees just a mile and a half away from the Muchmarkle house. January 29, 1972, Rose and Fred married in the Gloucester registry office. Fred's brother John was the only person to attend the wedding. Within a few months, Rose fell pregnant again with their second daughter, and the two moved to the three-story property, 25 Cromwell Street. The property was rented from the council and later bought by the couple. The extra rooms in the property were turned into bedsits to aid the couple in paying their bills. Lodgers were not permitted to access the ground floor or the garden while staying at the property. June 1, their second daughter, May June, was born. Shortly after the birth of their daughter, Rose turned to prostitution, using one of the rooms of their property to see her clients. She also engaged in casual intercourse with many of the lodgers, both male and female, that passed through and stayed at the couple's home. This was encouraged by Fred, and Rose bragged that no man or woman could completely satisfy her. It is reported that Rose gradually increased the brutality inflicted on those that she slept with, suffocating them and using increasingly large toys to inflict pain on those she slept with. It became apparent that both Rose and Fred took pleasure in pushing these clients past their limits. In 1977, Rose's father had come to tolerate Fred and Rose's marriage, and upon learning of his daughter prostitution, he would visit regularly to engage in similar activities to that of Rose's clients. By 1983, Rose had given birth to 8 children, at least 3 of which were known not to be Fred's. However, he took them on as his own, lying to them about his heritage when they inquired about the differences they had from the man they believed to be their father. Each of the West children were subject to years of abuse, most commonly inflicted by Rose. Fred himself was occasionally the target of the violent fits that Rose would have, in which she would scream at him, hit him, and had even chased him with a knife. Between the years of 1972 and 1992, the West children were admitted to the accident and emergency departments of local hospitals 31 times. The injuries were reported as accidents and never reported to social services. In October 1972, the couple hired Caroline Owens as a nanny to help care for their children. They had picked her up as a hitchhiker on a country road between Tewkesbury and her home in Cinderford. Having found out that she was looking for a job and disliked her stepfather, she was offered a part-time position aiding the couple with the 3 children in the household at that time. The Wests promised to drive her home each Tuesday, but within days she took up residence in the home, sharing a room with Anna Marie. Fred spoke incessantly about sex and said to the girl that should she ever require an abortion that he was quite skilled in performing them, bragging that those he had done the procedure to were so overjoyed they would offer sexual services as a reward for his help. When Owens began to experience these advances herself, she expressed her desire to leave the Cromwell Street property and return home. Knowing her habits of hitchhiking, the Wests made plans to abduct the young girl for their shared gratification. They picked her up along the A40 and expressed their regrets for the way they had acted around her. She believed their apology and got into the car. Owens sat in the back seat with Rose, who began to fondle her. Fred pulled over and beat the girl until she was unconscious before binding and gagging the girl with a scarf and duct tape. The couple took the girl back to their property, where she was drugged and exposed to a prolonged sexual assault from both Fred and Rose. After enduring the horrors that she faced, the Wests offered Owens the chance to return to her job, and she accepted, awaiting an opportunity to escape. Later that day, Owens was able to slip away from the house and return home. She told her mother the details of the assault, and the police were informed. Owens later retracted her testimony, deciding that she could not face standing in court. All charges were dropped, and the couple walked free after each paying a £50 fine. On hearing this news, Owens attempted to take her own life. 3 months after this trial, the Wests committed their first known murder. The victim, Linda Go, was a 19-year-old that had met the Wests through another male lodger. Go regularly visited the property to engage in affairs with 2 other male lodgers. It is said she was told to leave after hitting one of the West children. Go's body was found dismembered, her jaw wrapped completely in surgical tape to stop her screams, and 2 hollow tubes placed in her navel cavity, supposedly to aid her breathing. Long sections of string and various fabrics were found with her dismembered body. She is believed to have been suspended in the cellar of the home. Forensics determined that 5 people had been killed in the cellar of the house on Cromwell Street. In the following 17 months, 4 other victims met similar grisly fates as Linda, each one seemingly more horrifying with the last. Each body found in the shallow graves of the cellar were buried with the paraphernalia used to subject them to the horrors that they faced. Following the murder of Juanita Ma in April 1975, Fred concreted over the floor of the cellar, which would later be turned into a bedroom for his eldest children. The Wests took a break from their horrendous crimes until 1978, when Fred murdered 18-year-old Shirley Robinson. She was heavily pregnant at the time of the murder, and Fred is believed to be the father of the child. Resentment grew between Rose and Shirley. Whilst Rose was pregnant herself, Shirley was killed to maintain stability of the Wests' relationship. Shirley's body was buried in the garden of the residence, again having been dismembered and the fetus removed, but with no clear signs of sexual abuse. The final known murder committed by Fred and Rose West was of 16-year-old Allison Chambers. Chambers had run away from a children's home and moved into the property to be a nanny for the West children in the middle of 1979. Chambers resided with the West family for several weeks before her murder. She met the same fate as those before her and was buried in the garden of the property. The same year, Anna Marie ran away from the home, forcing Heather and May to become the focus of Fred's incestuous desires, the frequency of which only increased as the girls aged and his desire to impregnate them was made clear. Heather had applied for jobs in the town of Torquay, hoping to escape Cromwell Street and the abuse that she was subjected to. However, on receiving a letter stating that she had not been accepted for the position, the other children recalled hearing her sob through the night. The following day she had returned to normal and the younger children went off to school. On returning home, Heather was nowhere to be found. The West children were told that Heather had in fact taken the job. She would never be seen again. Rose had killed her own daughter, cut her up and placed her corpse in the dustbin. Fred later buried Heather in the garden and constructed a fire pit opposite the site of her grave, and placed a table directly over where she had been buried for use at family gatherings. The disappearance of Heather and constantly changing stories of her whereabouts led police to obtain a search warrant for the property, enabling them to excavate the garden. Additional claims from Louise, the 13-year-old daughter of Fred and Rose, that she had been physically abused by Rose and sexually abused by Fred led to police searching the property. Numerous objects and videos were seized and a full investigation began. The West children were placed in foster care and statements were taken from each. The case unfortunately folded due to Louise not wanting to testify against her parents. Fred and Rose were acquitted of all charges, but further investigation into the whereabouts of the older children of the family led to another search warrant being obtained by police in February 1994. On February 24, Fred gave a full statement admitting to the murder of Heather, intending to take full blame for the crimes that had been committed. Fred insisted that his wife had no knowledge of the crimes taking place. On searching the garden, police found a mass of human remains. Fred admitted to there being 2 other sets of remains in the garden but continued to deny any involvement from Rose. Rose West was placed in a safe house in the following days, allowing the police to fully investigate the property after an admission from Fred that there were approximately 9 more bodies on the property. Although he had continued to deny any involvement from his wife, investigators were suspicious of her having no knowledge of the horrors that had occurred in 25 Cromwell Street. Between March 5th and 8th, 6 more bodies of young women were found, many of which had been heavily mutilated, along with each bearing evidence of sexual abuse prior to their murder and dismemberment. Each body that was found was missing bones. Fred refused to divulge where these remains had been stored or the reason for their absence. Despite his continued insistence that Rose was not involved with the murders, she was arrested on April 20, 1994 on offenses of the rape of an 11-year-old girl and an 8-year-old boy. She was held in the maximum security wing of Puckle Church Prison and questioned about the murders in more detail. Following this, Rose was then charged with the murder of Linda Go. On May 6, both Fred and Rose were formally charged with 5 counts of murder. On June 30, 1994, Fred and Rose were brought before Gloucester Magistrates Court where, after further investigation, Fred was charged with the murder of 12 people and Rose with 9. This list grew as the days went by. However, pending the final trial, Fred West was found hanged in his cell. Rose West is currently being held in HM Prison Newhall, West Yorkshire, serving a life sentence without chance of parole. The surviving children of Fred and Rose West have gone on to live their lives as normally as they can. Anna Marie and May both having written books detailing the horrors that they faced and how life has continued for them. Stephen West was imprisoned for a short time, however, states that he has turned his life around. If you liked this video and want to find out more, click the link in the description to access our #1 source of information. Like and subscribe to be the first to see our next video. Do you have a story you would like to hear on our channel? Comment down below to hear your favorite true crime stories.